His first email says, I charge the lowest rent for rooms in my town, and I would like to raise the rent for the people who stay in my place. Well, it's your place. You own it. They rent. And sounds like it's about time to raise your rent, so good for you. There's an agreement in place, you continue, that the tenants share the cleaning of the communal areas every week on a rotation. Vacuuming, cleaning shared bathrooms, mopping the kitchen floor, blah, blah, blah. I'm already laughing. This is just like telling your children, now, I want you all to help with cleaning the common areas. You just will ride in a convertible and just spit into the wind. You say they can choose what cleaning to do each week. This is getting worse. My expectations are that they each at least choose one task a week, and I will also participate. This has been discussed in household meetings. I'm laughing because this will never work, and it's almost lovely, but really more naive how optimistic you are about people. So how do I know it will never work? Because I raised 7 children, and it's pretty much no different with adults. Adults are just little children in big bodies doing at least adult-approved activities, but they don't act like adults. You continue. This does not work very well, shocking, because I have to remind them monthly, and often I end up completing all the tasks myself. When I don't do the cleaning, it doesn't get done. Wow, is this sounding like parenting? This gets me down, and then the house becomes a complete mess. Honey, you're being used, and you're letting it happen. You have to, so it's really all your problem. It's not theirs. Once you understand human beings, you would never give assignments like this. Well, I hope you all keep the communal areas clean, because everybody hears that as, well, you all better keep the communal areas clean for me. That's what everybody hears. You have to assign tasks to each person, really. You have to say, you're in charge of the bathroom, you're in charge to the next person, you're in charge of the kitchen, whatever it is. You assign the tasks to each person, hopefully with roughly equal total labor for each one. Because if you tell one person you have to empty a garbage can once a week, that's not the same as cleaning the kitchen. So you can read the parenting book about assigning points for each chore and adding them up and making sure that people have relatively equal points. Then you tell them, if you don't like because there will always be somebody who says, well, I don't like this job. I don't like the assignment that you gave me. Boring. Again, it's like raising children. You tell them, well, you're welcome to trade with whoever you can make a deal with. Let's make a deal. I'll trade you the bathroom for the garbage plus the hallway, whatever. But let them figure it out. You make the assignments. And then you put up a sheet that has their tasks written on it, and a task isn't assigned until you've put down exactly what it has to be done. Like the kitchen counters have to be wiped off and disinfected, or whatever it is you want done, and it has to be done by exactly a certain time and day. So, like, mop the kitchen floor by each Thursday at 7 p.m. And you need to tell them, not 7:01, 7 p.m. So if they say, well, but I work, till 6:59, so I can't get there in time. Great. It just says by 7 p.m. So if you want to do it the morning before you leave, great. But by Thursday at 7. Then you tell them that you will remind them 2 times of doing their job if they haven't done it. After which, they will have to find residence elsewhere. That gets the job done. By the way, those were very similar to the rules that my children had. They could do their jobs, or they could find residence elsewhere. One child didn't believe me, so he got to spend a night or two outside sleeping with the dogs in the doghouse. And then he started doing his jobs. It doesn't take very long. Or you have another choice. You just put up with things as they are. But then you're pretty much saying you're willing to like being used and not having the cleaning done. Your choice. You continue. I've thought about getting a cleaner, an external, house cleaner, and splitting the costs equally among the tenants. I also thought about increasing the rent even more than I had planned on, and then I do the cleaning myself and to my standards, which is essentially the same as getting a cleaner. You wouldn't even specify who the cleaner is. I'd just recommend. You just say, I'm going to get a cleaner, and it will be this much more per month. Perfectly reasonable. That's a third choice that I didn't present. Perfectly reasonable. But you have to stop doing the cleaning just because they won't work. You conclude by asking, so what would you suggest that I say to them? Give them those three choices. The plan I gave you, or yours with a cleaner, whether it's an outside cleaner or you, doesn't really matter, and it's really none of their business. Or you just live with it. But living with it and complaining about it and hoping that they're going to finally become responsible people when their parents didn't succeed in teaching them how to be responsible people over a period of 20 years, that one's not going to work. So pick one. With your plan, then the rent would go up. Apparently you were going to increase the rent anyway, but it would go up a little bit more. That's a disadvantage. With my plan, there's also a disadvantage. There's a price to be paid for everything, because with my plan, you will lose some renters. Some renters will have an absolute fit that it's not fair that they have to clean the bathroom, which is harder than wiping off the kitchen. Believe me, there's always a whiny, victim-y complainer. So somebody will leave. You have to accept that everything has a price. But here's the real price, and this is the real problem. The real price that you're avoiding is their disapproval. You're afraid to upset them, which is why you clean when you've clearly given them the rules. It's why you haven't raised the rent until now. And the other problem, again yours, is that you've been vague about all of this. So, and one reason you've been vague is specifically to avoid their disapproval. So you got to grow a backbone and tell them what the conditions are for renting with you, or this is going to keep happening, which is fine with me because it doesn't affect me, but it doesn't sound like it's fine with you. This is a woman who months ago finalized a divorce with Mark, who was a completely selfish human being, who never shared himself emotionally on any occasion, ever. And I know that wasn't just an exaggeration on her part because, well, I do. I just know. It doesn't matter how. So she writes to me and she says, my family continues, mother, father, brothers, sisters, my family continues to invite my ex, Mark, to various family functions, which he is choosing to attend. Well, of course he is. He's a completely selfish human being who has no emotional life. So of course he's going to attend a family function where they're going to provide the life, the food, the entertainment, the emotional content, everything. He's extraordinarily lazy and he's only too happy to attend. At this point, you continue, I'm not wanting to be around him. Immediately after a difficult divorce, yeah, it's understandable. Is there a kind way to tell my family that as long as they choose to invite him, I won't be attending their functions? I'm afraid to say anything to them because it seems controlling to me. No, it's not, depending on how you do it. It was, in the first place, your family all your life. And now they're trying to be people pleasers, and they're demonstrating for the 10,000th time in your life that they don't really care about you. They don't really care about your feelings. But you could say this. You could say something like, I know you're trying to be nice to Mark, but we just barely divorced, and I don't feel comfortable being around him yet. I don't hate him. I just don't like being around him. That's why we divorced was so I didn't have to be around him. So you can make any choice you want. But if you have a family event and you invite him, I would ask you to notify me and I won't be attending. Or if you don't notify me and I come and he's there, then I'll be leaving and I still won't be attending. It's up to you. Now, pay attention to this. It's not controlling. You're already worried that you might seem controlling because you've been a people pleaser all of your life and your parents taught you to be a people pleaser. And it's not unlikely that they will accuse you of controlling them. And you would give in because you're a people pleaser. But this isn't, because you're not telling them what to do. You're saying, if you have an event and you invite him, you won't be going. So all you're doing is telling them what you will do. There's no control in that at all. And yeah, you get to do it. And in fact, frankly, you really kind of need to do it, or you're going to feel like the controlled one and you're going to feel like a smaller, less valuable, less worthwhile person. New subject. Young lady, 20 years old, lives at home with her parents. And she's been watching them do real love for a while. Recently, she's been learning it herself. She describes how her mother, who's been doing real love much longer than she has, browbeats her 10-year-old sister, Celia. She speaks harshly to her. And when little Celia is talking, mother interrupts and takes over the conversation. And so this young lady asks me, what should I do in this circumstance? Well, talk to your mother. You have a right to. Take her aside when no conflict is going on, and you could say something like this. You could stay out of it, but it's pretty clear that it's bothering you. So it's going to make you feel kind of impotent and weak if you don't say something. So you say, Mom, you don't realize you're doing this, but fairly often your tone of voice with Celia is distinctly unkind. Now, it's not likely, I'm just warning you, that she'll listen. Because one, you are her daughter and she wants to be the superior parent. It's just kind of a baseline condition of parents. And two, she's been doing real love for a while. And she would be embarrassed to admit that she's failing and that you're having to point something out. So she'll probably demand examples of where she's done this with Celia. You need to have those examples ready, as exactly worded as possible, because if you don't have them, your mother's going to dismiss you completely out of hand. And she'll almost certainly begin to justify or make excuses. If she does, you need to be ready for this because it's almost certain to happen. You immediately raise your hand. You stop her, which is what raising your hand means. And you say, Mom, I'm an uninvolved observer. You're not doing it to me. And I'm telling you that you are belittling Celia. You are speaking over her. You are speaking harshly to her. If it weren't true, why would I make it up? Why would I make a difficult conversation between you and me if it weren't true? Also tell her that she talks over Celia. And tell her that if she does it while you're in the room, you're going to speak up right then, and you're going to point out that she's doing it with Celia in the room and whoever else is in the room. Now, you need to do it kindly, but you do need to do it for your benefit. Now, when I told her this, it was on Skype, and she just visibly winced. Actually, the correct word would be blanched, but we don't hardly ever use that word anymore. She obviously really didn't want to do it. So I said, I'm not suggesting you do this to protect your sister. That's not really your job. You're not her mother. And not really to correct your mother, which is, again, not your job. The reason I'm suggesting this is for you to build your confidence in being loving and in making accurate observations. You have been made to feel small, just like your little sister. So by your speaking the truth, even though your little sister's involved, you will feel like a stronger person. And that's why I suggest that you do it. Very often we let things go on because we feel too weak to do anything about it. And without realizing it, each time we let something go by that we hate, we confirm our own weakness. We feel smaller and smaller, and we gradually lose our ability to speak until we have no ability to speak up at all. And our voice just disappears. And we wonder what happened to it. And this is how it happens. New subject. While reading your latest blog, I smiled as it reminded me of something that happened earlier this week. I was listening to a daily coaching video on nagging. And because I'm a visual learner, I chose to sketch in my Real Love notebook a no nagging reminder. One of those, little circles that you see in public, all the time, like no smoking. It has a cigarette and smoke rising, and they put a circle around it and a cross through it. So I did one of those circles around the word nagging with a slash through the middle, a red slash. My 4-year-old, Truman, asked me what I was doing, and I explained what nagging is, and I used some examples of when I have nagged, and I showed him what the sign meant. That was pretty brave of you. It was also brilliant. This is why I recommend parents and children read the parenting book together, because it puts everybody on the same path of following principles instead of families simply being run on the dictatorial concept. You continue. About an hour later, while I was cooking lunch, I started feeling stressed around Truman and his 9-month-old brother. And having a 4-year-old and a 9-month-old is almost inherently stressful. Truman looked me straight in the eye, 4 years old, and said, I'd love to have this on video. Give me your book. So I gave him the book. And he turned the pages and found the no nagging sign and held up the sign with his little finger going tap, 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 tap on the page and stared at me right down to my bones. This kid doesn't read yet, but he knew I'd get the message. And wow, I really did. It is amazing to me how real love lessons from children can give us the shivers and the giggles all at once. This is still her speaking. What a blessing. The whole family changes when we live by principles and not power. This is a great example of loving and teaching. Just beautiful. Here's somebody who says there's a woman in our group who complains that her new boyfriend is not available enough. The rest of that sentence, of course, is not available enough to her. He has custody of his 2 kids, who are ages 6 and 8, every other weekend. The woman in our group and the guy are both newly divorced. I've told her that she's probably over-clinging and she needs to get filled up outside of that relationship. So she's newly divorced. There's no mention that he has any involvement in real love, whatever. So she's almost certainly headed toward problems. Newly divorced in a relationship with a guy who's newly divorced isn't living real love. There are children involved. This is just like watching 2 trains head toward each other on the same track. The person who writes continues, she's generally empty, but seems to really resonate with the real love teachings. So here's my question. When you talk about marriage, you say that the spouse comes first before the kids. Yeah, I do. You continue. These 2 are dating, probably both empty. And so how would this apply to them? Is the boyfriend wrong in avoiding his seeing her while he has the kids? Or for now, is she better off focusing on being loved and loving? In this particular case, the answer I'm going to get to in a second, but with any couple dating in a situation like this, it depends on how serious they are about each other. If a couple is moving toward being a committed couple, then they need to start practicing now how to put each other first. They need the unity of their partnership to make them stronger with the kids. If they wait and enter a committed relationship and then decide to put each other first, it gets just really much more difficult with the kids all tugging and pulling and trying to drive wedges between the couple. The longer they wait, the harder it gets. But if they're just beginning to date, as it sounds like is the case with these two, it actually only makes sense that he would put his kids first in the beginning, because it doesn't sound like either of them has any idea whether this is going to turn into a committed relationship at all. In fact, it's usually a good idea until you know that, not even to have somebody you're dating meet the kids. Why get the kids all attached to somebody that you're going to end up not seeing? Otherwise, you go through what many couples do, an endless cycle of, I'd like to introduce you to this woman that I'm dating. Well, what happened to that woman, Dad? Oh, it didn't work out. I'd like to introduce you to this new woman I'm dating. Well, what happened to that woman? Well, it just didn't work out. After a while, your kids begin to think you're a real flake. This is about a lady who brought her husband for an intervention. He didn't look all that promising, like he was going to make it, but he listened. And because he listened, because he was willing to learn, he made astonishing progress, way more than I would have guessed in the beginning. But then, instead of being grateful for the 80% improvement that he made in his life, she spent most of her time with him criticizing him for the 20% that wasn't perfect yet. I suggested that she possibly express a little more gratitude, both to him and about him. She writes and says, I expressed yesterday's gratitude first thing this morning. I felt like he was hearing me and appreciative of it. Well, that's really wise. So my husband took our daughter to a craft shop this morning for something she wanted to find, and he bought some material for a necklace for me and asked my daughter if she'd be willing to make it at his request, but for me. I thought that was really sweet, and I told him so. Sweetie, he's really dying for you to melt his heart. He's a big teddy bear. Comes across as sometimes harsh, but his willingness to change 80% in a relatively short period of time, that's some real intent. She continues, the truth. Up to 5 months ago, pretty sure, I could not think of anything to be grateful for. My husband would get very annoyed at some point, and I couldn't think of a single good thing about our relationship. I even started to write you about the details until I remembered the purpose of my email and deleted it all. And then the memory of the necklace popped up. I'm learning a lot. Let me backtrack just for a second. When she said up to 5 months ago, no, it really was 5 minutes ago. Up to 5 minutes ago, she couldn't think of a single positive thing about her husband. And there's a reason for that. I often get emails from people griping about their partners, even though their partners have been overall improving steadily. We tend to remember painful events more prominently than we do non-painful ones. So you can be sweet and gentle and kind and non-intrusive for 10 minutes in a row, but in the 5 seconds it takes you to hit your partner in the face with a shovel, that all goes away, because being hit in the face with a shovel is really pretty memorable. And it turns out that the person who holds the shovel doesn't really experience that much discomfort. So we who are hit by the shovel tend to remember that event much more than those of us who swing the shovel. It takes practice for us to become more grateful, partly because we haven't been, and partly because it does actually take more effort to notice the good things instead of the painful things. This is from a lady who did an intervention, but her husband refuses to go to group, doesn't do conference calls, doesn't read books, nothing, has just no interest at all. And she says, I just had another really cool conversation with my husband, Dan. I don't know why I haven't seen this before, but everything he talks about, absolutely everything he talks about to me, to our son, to other people, is about real love. Well, of course. He just won't use the term. But he talks about real love because he sees it in you. You are a walking real love billboard, and he loves being loved by you. And he loves how you love your son because of what you've learned from real love. He just is one of those proud, stubborn people, and there are lots of us, who just doesn't want to admit that there was something he had to learn in the first place. You continue. There was a similar conversation to that one time that Dan talked about feeling the importance of feeling known. We talked about this in a past video chat, where this man would talk about how incredibly important it is that he feels known, by which he really meant unconditionally loved, but he could not bring himself to say the words. She says, I asked him about a work conference he attended this weekend, and he started off by telling me about his failed attempts at socializing. But instead of being embarrassed, he was joking about it. He was laughing about his own social awkwardness. It was hilarious. That's miraculous when somebody can joke about their own social awkwardness. It's not something that he used to do with you before. He's telling you the truth about himself. Now, he'd never used that phrase because he's heard it used in real love, and boy, he avoids those exact phrases like leprosy. He can see the principles of real love. He can see that they work. He just can't bring himself to be humble enough to admit that he was taught something. But he did learn it, and primarily because it's worked with you. You continue. Then he went on to share what he learned about the conference. And I really believe that what he learned was about how to be more of himself. He said that he often gets stuck in these ruts about how to wear the label of being whatever his job is, or his status in the company, or he talks about all that kind of stuff. But he says it really just distracts him from doing what he's, in his words, quote, meant to be doing, end quote. In other words, and this is me speaking, he's looking for a purpose in life. And the two things that he would enjoy, or at least one of the things that he would enjoy most, real love, he has ruled out of pure stubbornness. So what kind of position does that put him in? Frustrated, because he wants a purpose in life. He knows that loving is the purpose, but he's frustrated because he can't say it because of his pride. That's why sometimes when you talk about love, he gets awkward or even irritated. He knows what he needs, but he's fighting to be right. It's a real dissonance inside him between what is and what needs to be, what psychologists sometimes call cognitive dissonance. This is going to be hard for him to work out. At some point, you'll probably have to tell him that his life purpose might be hindered. The word might is important because he doesn't like to be told what is. Might be hindered by his limited range of possibilities. He would understand that statement as a scientist. He has simply limited his experiment, if you like. Scientists don't like to be told that. Limited his accumulation of data. If you limit your choices, your outcomes are limited. All scientists know that. In technical terms, and scientists would understand this too, we call that being a knucklehead. You say, and he shared about a moment at work where the meeting had gone off track and he'd been able to bring the meeting back to the point, and he'd felt so good about that. And I totally got what he was talking about, because he's talking about moments where he feels like he's being himself. I think he enjoyed that I understood what he was talking about. He nodded vigorously. I gave him the example of what I had done with my friend yesterday, that I'd been so bold and direct and fearless with her, and how good that felt. He didn't argue with me one bit. He just soaked up everything I was saying, and we came to the conclusion that we were both on a path of becoming truer versions of ourselves. Beautiful. He's learning. And at some point, he has to give up some of his prejudices, which is completely inconsistent with his scientific background, before he'll know who he is. But he's going to do that at his own pace. You're not going to be able to force him to do it. In fact, the more you try to force him to, the more he'll fight you. I told him again that I had a bit of a glimmer of us being a real powerful couple. That resonated with him. He referred to it again. He used the phrase, now that we're such a powerful couple, if we could both be truer versions of ourselves, then there's nothing we can't do. Some time ago, you said, she was referring to me, you guys have the potential for a spectacular marriage. And you know what? I saw a glimmer of that potential today. Who knows where this will lead us? But we'll just keep pursuing the path of truth and what's real and good and honest. This is lovely. It's a beautiful example of loving and teaching a partner with optimism and persistent gentleness. Love wins. Pushing people doesn't. You might get what you want for a minute if you push somebody, but you're going to lose in the long run. Dan said to me, she says, well, I think we're both closer to the truth than we've ever been. That's a big thing for him, because he used the words truth and we, including you, in the same sentence. And he has heretofore thought that he was the only possessor of truth in the family, since he was the scientist. You continue, in other words, we are as real as we've ever been. And our relationship is as real and authentic as it's ever been. I told him that I'm happy to be on the path with him. I could feel my closeness to him. And Dan could too. It was powerful. And it's all because of your faith. I'm not kidding. Intermittently you've had some times where you've really struggled, but you have persisted. You've trusted the truth. You've trusted love. You've trusted your partner, and it's really paying off. You conclude, who knew that all these times when Dan tells me about what he's learning and experiencing, he's really talking about finding himself, finding the truth, all the stuff that I love to talk about, just with different words. We felt so close during that conversation. So many times I have disregarded what he said, judged him for not getting that life is all about love, and completely dismissed him because he didn't use real love terms, missing that he's actually sharing his soul with me. Dan saying that we are both on the same path of finding the truth. I'm speechless, as am I. And that is what I was telling you during all of these months. Just love him and teach him. Don't push him or pressure him. Now you're seeing the payoff. And what you're doing is heroic stuff. You're breaking the patterns of generations of his family, of your family, and are creating an environment where your son is going to be happy for a lifetime. That's no small accomplishment. New subject. I know a woman who had enabled her daughter all of her life. The girl, Tammy, we'll call her, had been sexually abused as a child, so the mother reacted by treating her like an emotional cripple. Poor Tammy, she was sexually abused, so we don't want to push her. Poor Tammy, she doesn't really have to go to school today because she's dealing with her trauma. Poor little Tammy. So that mother did this kind of thing with Tammy all the time. So What did the child do? Because the child's both hearing the mother's language, treating her daughter like a victim, and she's feeling it from her mother. What did the child do? Well, she let the mother do it and acted like a cripple to fill the role the mother gave her. All unconscious, yes, but all still happened. But the end result was that when I saw the mother, Tammy was in her mid-20s and completely dependent on her mother, utterly. So, 25 or 6 years old, no driver's license, no job, not looking for a job, in bed all day long, doing absolutely nothing, calling out to her mother to bring her a glass of water, entitled, whiny, eating in bed. It was beyond sad. So the mother asked me what she could do. I said, just like every other parent does, love and teach. She did. And the daughter did better with loving and teaching, but was still just not, she was happier, but just wasn't quite getting the responsibility piece, And so what does the parenting book say? If you love and teach your child, and then you love and teach your child, and you love and teach your child, and you keep doing it, and loving and teaching isn't working, then what do you do next? Then you let consequences teach. And see, all of these 25 years, the mother had been protecting the child from the consequences of irresponsible decisions. In fact, if anything, the mother was encouraging the irresponsible decisions. So what's the solution? Consequences. And I suggested that she give her daughter a date in 2 months to be moved out. Oh, I thought the mother was going to scream and cry for half an hour on the phone. She said, well, I couldn't do it. It would be so cruel. How could I treat my daughter this way? My poor daughter's a cripple. She's emotionally scarred, blah, 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 blah. My response was, so how's your way working? You've got a crippled daughter who's going to stay crippled till she's dead. Actually, once you die, who's she going to rely on to wipe her bottom and wipe her nose and give her breakfast in bed? Who? Well, it's got to start sometime. So give it a trial. Just do it. Just trust me. So she went and told her daughter she had 2 months to be moved out. Within a month, the kid has an apartment and a job. And now the kid is a regular machine. She works, she does stuff, she has friends, she's happier, she's doing new and adventuresome things, all because her mother had the courage to feel her daughter's disapproval for a brief time. Because for a brief time, the daughter was pretty mad about it. And the mother had the courage to be consistent and to trust the truth and love instead of sympathizing and enabling, which just turns out entitled and crippled kids. So it's always about love and teach. Read the parenting book. New subject. Woman has a 3-year-old son named Thomas. And this kid has been raised now with real love, which is very cool. At age 3, to have, 2 years of experience with real love at age 3. It was really a problem in the beginning because the mother wasn't even sure she wanted to be a mother. And that's what the kid who was 1 year old, and she was ready to pitch this kid out the window. Thomas is not the kid's name, by the way. Because I can think of a mother who has a child who's 3 named Thomas, if I remember. I had such a good time with Thomas this evening, she says. He's so fun. He has started inventing songs. He'll pretend to sing about whatever, and then he'll say, Mommy, you can take my song if you want. He says this a lot lately. You can do this if you want. Always if you want. His songs today were something like, we can fly, we can grow up. He's quite fascinated by this concept of growing up. If I tell him he can't do something like drive the car, he will say, well, can I do it when I grow up? And I will say, Well, of course, absolutely. He is immediately content. That there are so many things he can do when he's grown up. Now, of course, he has no idea how long that's going to be, but he's already getting at age 3 the concept of delayed gratification. There was a study done that showed that the kids who are the happiest later in life are the kids who learned the principle of delayed gratification earliest. The kids who were most miserable are the kids who were given whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted it, which their parents did because the kids would scream and the parents would just give in. In fact, her kid used to be so demanding about getting what he wanted now, but she persisted in teaching him about doing some things later. So she would let him do some things now and then defer some things and then gradually, increasingly defer things. But you do have to be careful as a parent not to tell a kid no all the time. You need to say yes whenever possible, and then they don't mind as much being told no. The mother says, if I tell him he can't do something, now he asks me, can we do it later? And I always say yes to that, and he's happy. We had saved some food for later, and then I offered it to him again. And he said, so is later right now? And I just had to laugh and say yes. This delightful result, my dear, is because you were consistent during the time when both of you hated the adjustment to the new planet. She continues, we read a book called Peter Rabbit for bedtime tonight. It's about a little rabbit who doesn't listen to his mom and goes into somebody's garden and nearly gets caught by the gardener. Maybe it's that part doesn't matter. Actually, it kind of does. She says maybe it's she's from here, and says maybe it's a famous English kids story. I'm not so sure. I was a little alarmed to discover that there are parents in this country who haven't read those really old stories that I read to my kids. Things change with generations, don't they? Yeah, it's written by an English author. And there's a fascinating story that I'd recommend to everybody, a movie about the author called Miss Potter. This book is so famous that pretty much in my generation, every child read it, as in like every parent read it to their children. I read it to my kids at least 100 times, which every parent understands. Read it again, Dad. Read it again, Dad. Read it again until the pages are falling apart. The mother says, anyway, I thought maybe we could try to talk about it a bit and learn something from the story. So I said, this is a great little object lesson. Peter Rabbit didn't listen to his mother. And what happened to him? He got into trouble. Of course, I guess the lesson could have been that little Peter Rabbit was thrown into a pot on the stove, which would have been a little harsher. And then I asked, do you sometimes not listen to me? And he smiled and said, yes, sometimes I don't. And I said, what happens then? And he smiled again and he said, I go into the backpack. This is one of many mothers that I have suggested that what children hate pretty much more than anything is not being able to make choices. We all love making choices. Having those choices taken away from us, which is what prison is pretty burdensome to us. We don't like it. And so she's rigged up one of those child's harnesses and takes the handle of the harness and just hooks it up over a nail on a door. So he's comfortable. He's sitting in the harness, but he can't go anywhere. So she said, what happens when you don't listen? He said, I go in the backpack, meaning the harness where he can't move. The mother says, I think I've told you before, but I am blown away by his generosity, his kindness, his desire to learn, to help, to find solutions to everything, his trust. It is so amazing that he will now tell me how he's doing without me even asking him. He'll say, he'll come up to me and he'll say, my ouchie doesn't hurt anymore. Or I feel a lot better today. That's all I want, that he feels safe and comfortable to share his life with me. Imagine when he's a teenager and behaves like this. Oh, actually, I can. It's a miracle. New subject. On a conference call tonight, one of the coaches, this is from somebody who was apparently on the conference call, one of the coaches said, "Life is unfair, yet all day long we have many, many things that have happened to us throughout our day that are good. Some of us are aware of them as they are happening. Often we're not even aware of them, much less grateful for them." Which is understandable. When we're in pain, when we haven't known unconditional love in our lives, it's pretty difficult to be grateful for the little things when the most important thing is missing. The person who wrote this said, "A light bulb went off in my head. I immediately began to list those things that I was grateful for just today. I woke up. I'm alive. It was a day off for me, which gives me more flexibility in how to spend my day. I talked with my dad. I felt loved by him. As I went about my day after talking with Dad, I noticed that I was happier, I was smiling more, and I was in general calmer and hopeful. After I noticed that, I thanked God out loud for helping me today through my dad, as I had also felt that he'd answered my recent requests to help me let go of fear, anger, and instead to just trust. My sister contacted me wanting to know if there was a real love group where she lives, and she committed to be on the conference call tonight. I took care of all of my to-do list items today. I experienced tonight's conference call, which led me to write this list, which reminded me that I have been believing lies lately, that life is not good, that I am not good, that I am unworthy, that people suck, that I won't get this, that nothing will ever improve, that I'm not loved and I'm alone. But I am so grateful right now." This is a great example of what I was talking about before. It's so easy when we're experiencing moments of pain to remember all the other moments of pain. And they've actually studied it scientifically that people tend to believe that life will continue to be as it is right now, even if it's just as it is right now in our minds. So if some series of inconvenient, difficult events have occurred, it's pretty easy to go to, as this woman says, life is not good, I'm no good, I'm unworthy, people suck, I'll never get this, nothing will ever improve, and I'm going to go eat some worms. And everybody hates me. That was a childhood song when I was a kid, but I don't know, I've never heard children sing it in this generation. It's so easy to remember the bad things. But when we list the things that we're grateful for, then we realize how many more of those things there are than the things that are, let's call them less joyful. So pretty good habit to establish to be grateful. Here's a man who says, "I attach to women and they attach to me. Then we break up and I feel bad. I've never quite understood this." Well, you're really tender for a guy. You're kind. And then you continue. "I don't have the same attachment to men, so help me understand." Well, the obvious is that you like women because you're sexually attracted to them, or you like women more because they're more tender like you are, which is not uncommon at all. Really tender men tend to not find easily other tender men, because from the time studies have shown from the time we're 4 years old, people pretty much quit touching us. They touch little girls, kiss them on the cheek, hold their hands when they're in the park. But little boys, everybody quits touching little boys except to smack them around. And little boys are supposed to go off and dig in the dirt and play ball. The tenderness isn't as encouraged, in fact, often not permitted at all, from about age 4 on. So if a man is unusually tender, it's harder for him to find men who are similarly inclined. So how do you tell the difference between sexual attraction and just the fact that you're drawn to their tenderness, which you have? Practice. Be aware of your thoughts when you're with them. Are you enjoying their tenderness, or are you sexually fantasizing about them? And practice finding some sensitive men. I was talking to a man the other day, and he said, I just don't think there are any other sensitive men out there. And I said, I named two, and gave him their email addresses. And several days later, he wrote back and he said, there are tender men out there. And he just loved his conversation with these two guys. They're there, but we do have to, on the whole, look for them more assiduously than we do tough men. A woman writes, what does it mean to be responsible for my happiness? Does it mean remembering that I'm loved? I think she's the first person to ask that question in quite that way. Yes, because when you consciously remember the times that you've been loved, you are doing something to maintain your own happiness instead of, like making endless phone calls and insisting that other people remind you and reassure you. So if you remember, yes, you're taking more responsibility for your happiness. You're being responsible. It's a wonderful condition to get to. Not saying it's wrong to call people and get unconditional love. It's one of the main things that we teach. But it's even more responsible to remember what we have. So as we've talked about on countless occasions, what do? We find all the unconditional love that we can from as many wise people as we can collect. We then have to trust the love that these people give us, or it wouldn't matter how much love they give us. In fact, I've been on phone calls with people who said, I just called to get some love. And then I began to love and teach them, but I didn't love and teach them with exactly the words, exactly the tone of voice, using precisely the phrasing and everything else that they wanted. And so they started to argue. And there have been occasions when I've just said, well, when you decide that you're going to let me love you my way, which is the only way I can do it, and trust that I'm loving you, let me know. Until then, arguing isn't going to do you any good. You can argue with a fire hydrant. If you go up and down your street, you'll find one pretty soon. And I've just hung up. So finding unconditional love is good, but then we have to trust it. And then even that's not enough. As this lady brilliantly suggests, it's even more responsible to remember the love that we have found and trusted, because now we make it ours. When we remember it, not only do we have it, but we've now changed our entire mindset and become lovable, worthwhile people because we remember it. And then with that power, we take the fourth step, which is to share the love that we have gathered, trusted, and remembered with the people around us. And then the love magnifies even more within us. It's a bit of a miracle. I'll see you next week.